NC State, right?
Yes.
For many years, we worked with Christine when she was executive director for the Center of Environmental Implications of Nanotechnology, St. Headquartered out of Duke University, and we were one of the partner institutions of that. So we've collaborated for many years. She's originally from Houston, did her PhD in environmental risk assessment at Duke, master's from Rice in environmental analysis and decision making, and yes, she is an Aggie, BS from Texas A&M, and industrial engineering in Spanish. So she does have some land grant credentials. So with that, please welcome our speaker, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for the kind introduction and the lovely invitation to come join you all. I've really enjoyed everybody I've spoken to. And today, because it's Friday afternoon and it's gorgeous outside and you're spending it with us, I'm really wanting to make it conversational and just kind of, it'll be, as Jason alluded to, a little bit high level about like, what is this integration and how does it apply in wicked problems? And I've been really interested in how we make that practical and kind of take it from buzzwords to like, but what do we do here as a team? So is the mic sounding okay from where you are? It's always so weird for the person wearing it. Okay, great. All right, so this is not for detailed intake, but I talked with the grad students a little bit today and about kind of my career path. And one thing that has kind of influenced how I've done things is that I've bounced from different sectors at different times. So industrial engineering, then I went into oil and gas supply chain consulting, then I did a master's, then I did like a biodiesel startup, then I did PhD, then EPA. So the fact that I've done sort of life in academia and industry and government in different places has really influenced what I got interested in about expanding those boundaries. So the main message is, again, especially because it's Friday afternoon, is I really like to say, I'm hoping you take away a couple things. And to do that, I'm going to tell you a couple of categories of topics. So first, how do team science and convergence and complex wicked problems, how they kind of blended in the projects that I'm working in. And then some specific examples of that sort of theoretical backbone. And hopefully the two things that you'll take from this talk are the fact that there are tools and a growing evidence basis and a growing number of professionals who do this type of integrative work. So that when you're in your teams or you just know about this work, just you can be aware that there's things to tap into and draw upon. And then maybe some sparks of ideas for future collaborations with stuff that we've got going on at Appalachian. Okay, so the background, I won't go too much into the origin story of this, but the nano and material environment health and safety field, or nano EHS, was really where we first kind of started blending all of these boundary spanning kind of team science things, at least in my application. So in the early 2000s, people, when we could both synthesize and measure nanomaterials, we started noticing, okay, they have different properties, right? And this is sort of the origin story of SAINT. So this is a map of the SAINT universe as it was. And so it's just tons of organizations all over the world kind of working together to address this double-edged sword issue, which is that, you know, the novel properties that are afforded by these small sizes could have like the same properties that do the things you want it to do could do these collateral damage issues. And so this is no strange concept to this group, I know, but it was a very contaminant focused view that we took at the beginning of nano EHS rather than like a systems view. So we were really coming at this, and the funding was coming at this from the perspective of let's interrupt this unintended collateral damage cycle that we have. So, you know, mercury amalgamation, you know, becoming a problem in seafood, and, you know, pesticides, and of course the CFC issues, having all of these kind of cascade risks. So at the time we said, okay, let's not let nanotechnology be this, right? So we're looking for pretty straightforward kind of contaminant relationships by and large. But then we were also recognizing those other examples that I just explained, a lot of those were risk assessment sort of like forensics, right? So forecasting an emerging technology risk is not the same as forensics. So how is that different, and how can we grapple with all this uncertainty so that you can, guess what this Rube Goldberg machine is gonna spit out in terms of what the technology does. And so the way that we did that was through nano environment, health and safety work. We get all of these ideas from across tons of different disciplines, right? And not only that map of state that I showed you being different geographies, but everybody from material scientists all the way to toxicologists and everything in between. You get all their ideas, you filter the knowledge across the fields, right? You have to synthesize it and then forecast risks, and then you get what's the next best question, right? And so you kind of circle this around. And we know this, it's kind of established in lots of different complex teams in medicine and other groups that, we have to blend our ideas, but it's kind of the how that we do that. I always like to look at this. Some people, I've shown this before in other contexts, so you might have seen this if you've been to one of my talks, but do you know what perspective anamorphosis is? It's a category of art that is this type of thing. You might have seen different steps. So this is a glass sculpture, and if you're standing in one perspective, it looks like this. But if you stand in another on the corner, it looks like this. And it looks like this if you're on one side, right? And then it's designed where it's a totally different thing from the other side. Anyway, this is an awesome creative feat, right, that this person has done. So that's all the same thing. And so people are seeing different things depending on where they're standing, and they're all right. And then here's just another one. So I think it's so cool. So in this case, there's only one vantage point that would give you the, cohesive view. And so this is just a little bit of an allegory for what we see people doing when they're taking their perspectives to a problem. And so condensing this 12 years of work that Saint ended up being into a few slides, I would say the takeaways were it's not only individuals that are integrating, but it's whole disciplines encountering each other, and the difference between their epistemologies and their academic cultures are real. And many barriers that come up could be avoided. Like there's some own goals involved in things that are difficult about crossing, right? So if we recognize different epistemologies and work toward a shared vision, then that can help. And so that could land, but it could also just sound like words. So some of the example boundaries that need to be spanned that I thought were really interesting at the time are that natural sciences, by and large, among other things, are well versed in describing the context, hunting for interdependencies, right? And wanting to get into the detailed mechanistic technicalities and of just seeing how do you observe what is the reality, the real phenomenon. And then engineering, among other things, they do some of that too, not to limit it too much, but they're well versed in reducing things to apply boundary conditions and see what they can control, and find finite assumptions to say, how can we use the information we have to get an outcome we want? And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you would disagree, but it brings up a lot of differences in what you're even trying to do by creating new knowledge. And so describing would be this natural sciences versus prescribing. And when you come together, for example, we have these mesocosms, right? There are these large simulated wetland sandboxes. The engineers, if they want to shake things up and do a couple of tests here and there, and figure out what the sediments might do, they can do that. And the time period that it would take to fix a mistake in that might be a week. They could re-examine and do their same test maybe a week later. Whereas the ecologist, if you mess up the system, you might be ruining someone's 3-year postdoc. So the describing and prescribing and watching and wanting to know the context versus reducing to what you can control, it's important to understand those differences. And then just some other observations are boundaries of so many kinds. So that's one example of noticing what you have to span, but you might have to span scale differences, which is just this picture, but disciplines, geographies, sectors, points of view, career phase and personalities. And all of these are things that you've definitely seen, right? So these aren't big surprises. But what I did get the sense of is that there surely must be somebody doing this on purpose and having some methodologies. Everybody who's trying to do this that I was near in the practitioner role was doing it from intuition and maybe tacit knowledge and some experience. But I had an anthropologist friend who invited me to the Science of Team Science meetings. And I'm just curious, by show of hands, has anyone heard of this? The Science of Team Science community? Okay, Jason has heard of it by coincidence. So I first got invited to give a talk in like 2013. And I was like, I don't even know what this is. How can I give a talk? And she's just like, talk about your job, just say your experiences. Okay, I can do that. It was in a city where my friend lived, so I did. And it ended up changing like the course of my career because it was a real, I think of it as like an estuary community of practitioners meeting people who research. And so it's a lot of the researchers are in management, organizational psychology, and behavioral sciences. And this kind of work of studying teams and how they work and what makes them effective grew out of NIH investments. But it was kind of drawing on task-oriented team understanding and moving it to understanding teams that are in a knowledge-producing setting, which is a different thing. So I went to that. Everybody came up after me, like, well, not everybody, like 10 people, but that felt a lot. And people came up to me and they were like, that's me. What you just described is me. And I don't have a colleague that does anything like what I do. So we realized, okay, well, we need to create a community of practice, just started little. And what we realized is that this is just a totally generic team model. Like you might put this in any giant proposal or see it where you're like, okay, these are all the different pieces that interact, and like product engineering, material science, chemistry, those people interact. Then maybe they were with geochemistry. And from talking to all of you, I know how broad ranging everybody's expertise is here. But what you would notice if you're building a team is that in that box that says economics, you would have a person's name and what she's doing for the project. Whereas any of the arrows, no name, it just magically happens. It's just supposed to transfer. You're supposed to be able to know how to connect back to these other people. So our point was, okay, somebody's got to be the arrow. Like you got to name that arrow. So these are just a couple of things in the name of leading you with the idea that there's tools out there. There's the Insights is the international network for the science of team science. And there are books on disciplining interdisciplinarity. That the person who wrote that book also made up the field called integration and implementation sciences. I added a syllable, I think, in there, but it's I2S, and her name is Gabrielle Bammer. And so these are things about how to intentionally be the arrow, which is the tagline for the community that we created. So it's called Interdisciplinary Integration Research Careers Hub, or InterReach. The reason it's so long is because there are these pocket communities that have been talking about this for a while. And we wanted to not try to tread on their names, but to actually invite everybody who thinks that they do this into one place. And so we have a dual mission of developing the profession, like make it so that you could grow up and say, I want to be that. I want to be an integrator, just the way you can want to grow up to be a soil scientist. And then professional development. So like doing cross-pollination of methods and uptake in this estuary community of like, if somebody's publishing something, let's try it out and then let's practice it on ourselves and study ourselves. So if anybody's interested, it's a totally free and open community and membership. We meet the second and fourth Tuesday of every month, and it's pretty fun. Yeah, it started from nothing. It was like 10 people's business cards at this one conference where I didn't think I even belonged there. And now we have about 600 members in our listserv, and usually about like between 20 and 40 at any given meeting. So it's been a vibrant place. This is another just set of tools. There's a free Mendeley reference library. If you're ever writing a proposal, you feel like you need to talk about some team science stuff. It's organized. Anybody can go join it. You can just email me if you're ever interested. But it's a lot of volunteer work to create a community of resources around this stuff. So this is another slide that I always really like. So shifting now, okay, we practice this nano VHS convergence. We then I went and found this block of people who were like, yeah, this is actually a science. We could do this on purpose well. And build a discipline. And then, so I'll just give you not too much theory, but like a handful of big takeaways from that whole body of evidence that I've really found useful in all Convergent projects since then. So this is an analogy that adapted from a paper by Modi Nasani on interdisciplinarity. And so it's just this continuum. I named it collaboration toward convergence because you all probably know that convergence is now NSF's one of its 10 big ideas, and it's the US kind of name for transdisciplinarity that's really been big in EU. But it's one of those things that, because of how language works, it can get kind of buzzwordy, and it's interesting to figure out what does it actually mean. So the other thing that happens is when something is a buzzword and it's a big idea, then it can get conflated with being correct for every purpose. So like, if you're excited about your hammer for a while, everything looks like a nail, right? But this is a nice graphic that I like, which is like, okay, disciplinary teams or collaborations, if you're trying to like redo a theoretical equation, you don't need somebody from a totally different field. You need a bunch of different color apples from your field to be, fixing that fundamental science. So sometimes you go deep. Then multidisciplinary, maybe there's discrete tasks, like someone's taking data and they're handing it to their statistician partner. And you're doing discrete, potentially sequential tasks. You're both in the fruit bowl together, but it's pretty separate. Interdisciplinary is maybe you're doing that all the time. So then that's your go-to statistician. Maybe you have a go-to social scientist partner. And you start to kind of understand each other, but you're still doing pretty separate tasks. And so for the fruit bowl analogy, like you could definitely pick out all the grapes and only eat those if you want, right? You know what's different. By the time you get to the smoothie, then it's blended up so much that you can, other than the taste profile of everything, you can't really extract it back out. So this is when you've been in multiple disciplines, have been working together so long, understanding each other's methods, that they can ask new questions together that they couldn't have even formulated before. And that's when it's really converged. So then the thing that I add to this is the blender is how you do that convergence. And so the blender is, these methods. How is it that you get to the smoothie? You have to make it, pragmatically become that. And then further, I think that arguably the most important part of the blender is the lid, because everybody can imagine what happens if you're just like, yay, I'm blending up all this fruit. And then that is also what can happen when you just like put everybody together and talk about ideas without some kind of structural way of integrating it. You've probably been in conversations where you're like, well, that was cool, but now I got to go back to my work. I don't see how it actually edifies my approach. So that's where the scientific approach to uptaking some of the science of team science has really helped. This is just some factors that we know affect collaboration, and this is from a paper that was really early in team science, Hera et al. So vision compatibility, one thing is like temporal orientation, which is cool. There's studies on people who work to the deadline and they're motivated by that, and people who really need to have their PowerPoint done like 2 weeks before, and how that, without managing it through explicit leadership and communication, it could take a whole project, but it doesn't have to, if you manage these things. So those are just examples. Chemistry, trust is probably the most important word on this. This is early from the literature, so almost 20 years ago, but this is a quote that I like to point out too, because it says that one way that we really get to collaboration and success is compatibility on broad historical, philosophical, and strategic grounds, common experiences, values, and principles, and hopes for the future. So that makes sense why there's affinity there, but the thing that jumps out to me so much about that is note how vulnerable that is to systemic bias, to picking people that have your same background, hopes, understanding the world. And so just really keeping an eye on the fact that I think we've come a long way since this publication to say, okay, that we need to look for the fact that we understand those affinities driving collaboration, but we need to work against the kind of the drive to pick more of ourselves. Okay. So one other thing, this is an important tool, like I would add this to the takeaways. Who has heard the term, if anyone, boundary objects before? Okay, so I hadn't heard of this either until coming over to Science of Team Science, and it's from social ecology. There's a woman, Susan Lee Starr. She made up this concept, and they're almost counterintuitively named. So they sit at the boundaries between disciplines or between fault lines in order to span them. They don't create the boundaries, so it's more like a bridge than a wall. But they're artifacts that are either concrete or abstract, that allow people coming from many different points of view to anchor. So I described the sandboxes, the mesocosms. There were material scientists and ecologists and sedimentologists all working in that same place. They didn't have to understand everybody's orientation to it, but it allowed them to work together, and it actually mandated that they stay in it together. It could also be a visual or something, but some kind of thing that anchors people to allow a broad range of individuals to contextualize their contribution. And it took me like 10 years of doing this to be able to say, like, no, a picture, like one graphic could make the difference between your project working and not. It feels like you're just saying it's a picture, but a boundary object has functionality that's pretty important. So the creation and management of them is a big part of what integrative work is. So I'll just move to some specific examples of how we're applying these just quick buffet of concepts in some projects and teams that I'm a part of. Okay, so one of them, from the nano world, I was part of chairing this community of practice about nanoinformatics integration. It had some people doing what we were doing, the type of like fate transport transformation work. It also had some folks from NIH who were trying to track liposomes transport in blood. And so we were doing a lot of the same techniques, but differently and with different contexts. And I noticed that people on the liposome side had answers to questions that people on the fate and transport side didn't think we could answer yet, and vice versa. So we ended up writing a proposal to the Convergence RAISE program. And it was about harnessing extracellular vesicle mediated interkingdom communication in the rhizosphere. So cells, all living cells exude these little packages of information that are made of themselves and go out into the world for a bunch of different purposes, extracellular vesicles. So we wanted to know, how do fungi and bacteria and plants communicate or affect each other or compete or all these things in the soil? We were way not even over ambitious, because basically at the end we're like, okay, how can we measure it and count them and make them the same way on purpose every time? But what we noticed is, we wanted to understand what's in the cargo, what makes it be generated, what makes it successfully travel, and what makes it attach, what makes it get in there, and then what determines whether it has the effect that it was intended. One thing we learned is how much we anthropomorphize everything that's living. We don't do that to like carbon atoms. We're not like, it wants to get in there, but our language does that actually with biology. So it was interesting because the people on the vesicle biological side, they had a lot of information about the cargo and the impacts. They had not considered, and tons of data, mostly in mammalian systems, but they had not considered the surface chemistry of the extracellular vesicles or the effects of the surrounding environment on the fate of the vesicles once it was blebbed off, and whether it would make it through, whether it would attach where, to a target and all of that stuff. And similarly, the people who were in the fate and transport side didn't know anything about we had very rough output ideas about like, what are the outcomes we might measure from a bio side. So we assembled this team, and the thing that was risky, it felt at the time, is so I put together the team with myself because I was leading the effort, as I claimed I2S as the discipline, and we don't think that has been done before for NSF, because Gabrielle Dammer made up invented the field. And so I didn't put that I was an environmental engineer. I put that I was going to be leading the team as an I2S. And very importantly, I don't do or and cannot do really any of the things that the people in the other bubbles came from. So I did come from engineering applications and nanoscale transport world. So that's that bottom pink bubble, but I could not be doing that research at this point. I kind of like tracked off to the right. So then we also had a geosciences and biogeochemistry person and a biosciences person, the extracellular vesicle background. We pulled in a mycology person, applied soil scientist, and microbiome expert too. And it was funded. So they would either hate it that I had nothing to do with the science I was saying that I was going to lead, or they might try to go for it. And NSF said yes. So the takeaways there were that there were significant blind spots between these, the various pieces that left open this empty space that we knew we could contribute to. And that included having very few, even on the biological side, studies of plant systems with this kind of stuff. But the other really important finding, we haven't published on this yet because we have a little bit more time, is that finding these uncharted territories, those like, hey, nobody's ever asked that before, very exciting to faculty, very terrifying and burdensome to graduate students. So it's really important. You're like, oh, great. We have no way of telling you if you're on the right track, but you do have to leave in 4 years, So it's really important, I think, going forward in Convergence, and our takeaway from this is that we have to find ways to manage the burden of uncertainty through mentorship and very clear communication, and helping them discern what do they not know because they have not learned it yet, and what do they not know, but they don't actually have to learn it because somebody else will be that. And then what do they not know because no one has done it before, and that's the very edge of knowledge. So it's important for us to learn how to mentor in that. And then the next example I wanted to share is, okay, so then in maybe like 2019, we ramped up with a team I was working with that has all these universities, used to be at the bottom, headed out of NC State, which Jason mentioned, Science and Technologies for Phosphorus Sustainability. Spoiler, we did win it, and we were part of the 2021 STC class, really, really excited. And this was kind of the time that was like, all right, it's finally time to take these ideas to the track, like really see what it can do. And it was really fantastic. I got connected with the team, and the director of the center is Jacob Jones. He's a material scientist at NC State. Went fully bought in on the Convergence idea. So he thinks of it as STEPS is a Convergence Research Center with phosphorus as the study vehicle. And so to do that, he invited me to be on the team with the other leaders. And again, as one of the co-PIs, we put my discipline as I2S, or Integration and Implementation Sciences. So really kind of doubling down on, hey, this is a thing, we need to do it on purpose. So it's a partnership of all these different universities spread out. It's $25 million US over 5 years, or 52 if we get renewed, which we plan to. We've got like 40 senior investigators right now, somewhere almost like 70 students involved. It's really large. We're all leveraging too, like you do with these centers. And then you see these pictures, I'll talk about them more as boundary objects, but in addition to the universities, we have 3 named triple bottom line scenario sites. So triple bottom line being the sustainability, social, and environmental and economic type of sustainability. So what this means is there are rich data sets of different systems in which we can measure phosphorus and also the decision makers around them. And so it's an urban watershed in Phoenix, and the Everglades, and also Tidewater Agriculture Station in Eastern North Carolina. This we went over that the convergence being a big idea was kind of what made us go down this road. And phosphorus, this is the part where like we're probably really in your cup of tea, and I don't have to tell anybody that phosphorus is essential for animals, plants, microbes, and drives crop yields and food systems. This is the choir in terms of preaching to the choir. We do make a statement about like why an entire center around one element on the periodic table. And because it is important to have a narrow enough thread to like that boundary object idea to anchor everyone together, to say, well, I'm coming from this way left field and you're coming from over here and we're caring about the same thing. So the phosphorus cycle is linear and broken on both ends, right? So we know that we are mining it from non-renewable resources, over applying it, only 20% is even taken up in the form that it is in, and then run off and released to the environment, causing putrefaction. And as population rises, it becomes less and less sustainable. The people in the phosphorus world are often saying, this is actually a more dire problem than even climate change in some ways, because of the rapid nature of the famine that could come on. So this is me telling you things that people I work with have said, but it's essentially really dire, but it has a really bad marketing problem. Like, if climate change is hard to explain, like, hey, everybody, phosphorus is on fire, like it's trouble, like that's really hard to get people behind. So we have a lot of communication issues there. So the vision for steps is 25 and 25, meaning 25% reduction in both reliance on mined phosphate and release to the environment within 25 years. And this, this was one thing that really worked for us, is having this catchy vision. We don't know if this is exactly what we can do. We were actually given some, red team feedback that this is like way too arrogant of a goal, but that you kind of have to start somewhere. And it really helps people. It's a little bit of a boundary object in itself. It helps people say, like, okay, this is what we're trying to do, whether we're coming at it from economic systems or, atomic modeling. So speaking of atomic modeling, one of the ways that phosphorus is difficult is that it spans, we say, 17 orders of magnitude on the length scale. So from atomic scale to like the Earth. And so this is a way, it shows you how the center is divided up into three things. So the material scale, and then we call it the human technology scale. So that's environmental engineering modeling of systems. And then regional and global scale. So those are ecology, public policy, that kind of length of scale length of change and different methods that we put in. To span all these scales, we realized at the beginning, and this is how we kind of made it sell it as a convergence center, was that we realized there's this unique opportunity. So there's a moment in time when there's been 15 years or more of investment in what is team science, what is science of team science. And there's some of these communities forming, and the books here are kind of representing that body of literature. And so we're using that to both drive the structure, like, hey, let's try out some of these things, let's put it in practice, and also to drive our design of research of ourselves. So the literature base and the growing body of evidence, we're applying it to set ourselves up with the right scaffolding and do collaboration planning and all these things, and also to see if we can put ourselves to the test. So here's one of our boundary objects, and it seems overly simple, but it's really helped us to get together. It's just look at the phosphorus flow diagram. So the P flow diagram, and it's not complete, it's not perfect, kind of models, from phosphate rock into fertilizer and industrial uses, into the systems in which it then circulates. Agriculture is obviously a big one. And then into the food cycle and excretion to surface waters, and then natural landfills or natural ecosystems and landfills. So this is sort of our conceptualization, and everybody can put a star on this picture, like you are here, or you're like encompassing the whole thing. And that's really helped us onboard people. So the mass balance of the inputs and outputs demonstrate our issue here with the broken cycle. And then these are the losses and the big problems that they cause, right? So that's kind of back to the impetus for the entire center to exist. So the priorities, really, we have to choose. The priorities first are soil balance, phosphorus. This I'm sharing for the second takeaway, which is if you see one of these things here where you're like, ooh, I might plug in with that somehow. We really want to grow steps beyond just the footprint of the core funded people to get, a lot of collaborations and interested parties. So So what is soil bound phosphorus and what can make it available? Animal manure, how do we, both on the supply chain and, waste management, but also the chemistry point of view, how do we recapture phosphorus for use, and how do we even feed them the right things to make the things in their manure better, right, for recovery? Surface water, and then human urine. So if you ever come to visit steps at Arizona State, you will see Shepherd Boyer has an entire building outfitted with special urinals that capture it all and bring the urine to one great location so that it can be tested. And I learned from him, which I didn't know, maybe you all knew, that we're in the first 100 years of not seeing urine as a commodity, like an asset, that we just throw it away. I did not know that we had lost the knowledge that we should keep this that. So then this is another way that we span boundaries, is kind of across sectors. I mentioned that a few times. So I'm sure, being at a land grant school, having extension, this is not news to anyone here that you should have use inspired research and bring in your stakeholders from the beginning. But we really try to use sort of the cyclical incorporation of people's opinions from the very beginning of even our hypotheses. So this you've already seen as a boundary object. I want to also let you know that these are the three triple bottom line scenarios, and that the thing I didn't mention when I brought them up as boundary objects early is that we also use this as a real testing ground for our students to integrate. So you can see a whole system and also try to come there from across many of the different universities to span those institutional boundaries. Another way we try to implement all this stuff is building convergence capacities in individuals and in teams. And so to translate that from just words to what are you actually doing, we have we put flow diagram activities in all of our seminars so people can kind of interact with it. We have a dictionary input form. So anytime you're listening to something and you think that somebody's using a word different than you. So the other day we had 3 people have totally different definitions of model or material or just a word like that. We are always having people enter that in so that we can see how different disciplines maybe use the same words differently or different words in the same way. These are some other things. We have this shared library, which lots of teams do that, but we try to organize it in the way that I showed you the Mendeley was, where we ask, if you're a social scientist coming, please put the 2 seminal works you think everyone should read, right? And then kind of gather them that way. The dictionary form there, and then we do formalized collaboration planning, which is in that team science book, where it's just an actual process of establishing expectations. It's kind of like group therapy, or they call it a prenup for teams. And then this is just saying that we actually study ourselves as we do it. So we can't know that we have done 25 and 25 successfully until 25 years from now. So we have to actually measure and study our antecedent conditions that we know from team science literature. So have we created communication capacity? Have we designed our projects in a way that's going to work? And the last thing I just want to tell you is about how we're doing this in the high country at Appalachian State. So being a PUI, primarily undergraduate institution, we mostly have undergraduates doing researchers, and we mostly have teacher scholars as our faculty. And so this is a picture of all of our faculty at the top, and 2 staff people. We don't have a picture yet of them, but 9 undergrads, 2 master's students, and 1 postdoc at App State. And this has been a really fun opportunity. So we have one big project together, and the idea was that we can make over the 10-year arc, how can we become a triple bottom line scenario site representing mountainous systems and agriculture in rural mountain sites. So they do research for the first half for the spring and summer, and then that is the end of their kind of research cycle. We realized that aligning it with the academic year is important to be able to fit in the faculty lives, and and the student expectations. And then in the fall, they all team teach this course, which is a research experience in honors college called RAMP Wicked Phosphorus. And RAMP stands for Research to Action Multidisciplinary Projects. So we created this model in honors college and people can use it for whatever topic. So they team teach it and then they, together with their students, kind of make a little bit more progress on their research, put in RFPs to Step Central, and then do another year. So we're going to have this model that builds on itself for 10 years. And it almost the meta puzzle of figuring out that was almost the hardest part. But it has been really neat to see how it can happen. So there's biology, ecotoxicologist, government and justice studies, chemist, and geology, geochemist, basically. So all of those folks are bringing their expertise. Why it's special? So the high country in North Carolina, this is a nice picture of the lost provinces. Over here, the colors, but the high country technically is these counties. So these two colors plus 2 other counties south, and that's like an actual 7-county district, and all the county commissioners work together and kind of make decisions together in that part of Appalachia. So we're using that as the triple bottom line scenario site for that boundary. And things to know are that the largest scale ag activity is Christmas tree farming. Predominantly small landholding farmers are there, livestock and produce, and lots of sustainable agriculture and sustainable food systems and rural resilience focus. And we're also the site of headwaters that feed down to 5 different river basins, like going different directions. So there's a lot of cool things about this area that we can monitor, and it's manageably small that I think we can build to a rich data set over, the next 10 years. I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about each of the people who is contributing a task to this. But because I'm going to share this slide deck, really, they had to fit everything onto one slide, so you're going to see these are dense. I just don't want to scare you with it, like 3:45 on Friday. But you can come back to it if something piques your interest and you want to see more. So our government and justice studies contributor is interested in where governments interface and have leverage points over making decisions that would affect the phosphorus flows. So if we made a P flow diagram for the high country, who would be the people who are pulling the levers to decide this? And so this is a list of the different government agencies that Dr. Rickabaugh is looking into. And he's got several students helping him with that. Matt Alwu is an integrated ecologist in our sustainable development department. And he's modeling phosphorus flow and effects of monogastric, so like chicken microbiomes, and their reaction to phytase and in the feed. And so he's monitoring this piece on our farm. He has another colleague that is preparing the food in different ways and seeing how that part of the cycle through the monogastrics outside of the actual birds themselves affect the flow. And then we have an ecotoxicologist who has been gathering data on this watershed that feeds the 5 river basins for 10 years. And so doing a lot of nutrient measurements and kind of tracking those. We're working on a variety of methods, and got to see Jason's lab today and the nutrient characterization. So that's been really good. Mike Hamburger is measuring phosphorus flows through a small farm with a single cow. So it's like a really closed system, and it's his house, so it's easy. So he's doing that, and he's also looking at anaerobic digestion of the waste and management that way to see the different phosphorus flows. And the last thing I'll just say, because I chose not to focus on this for the talk, because you can only say so much, but since one of my takeaways is that I hope that you're able to think about different ways we could connect. The Research Institute for Environment, Energy, and Economics, which I have the pleasure of directing, is one of 2 research institutes at App State, and it's really the research arm of our sustainability mission for the university. And we have 3 centers within us, one focused on Southern Appalachian Environmental Research and Education, one on Appalachian Energy Center, so it's like all renewable energy, state funded, and then Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis, which does market valuation and non-market valuation studies alike. So doing research on how we can help businesses value externalities, report them, get credit for all that. And our purpose is to look for intersectional research, grow convergent big research projects, and try to do creative ways to allow partnerships. Even though we are an undergraduate university, there are really good ways for us to be complementary with our research strengths across this, across lots of these sustainability topics. So hopefully I've done enough to give you these takeaways. The fact that there's growing tools, evidence basis, and people really dedicated to making convergence real. And then maybe you've got some sparks of ideas. So I'll take any questions if you have them. And thank you so much for your attention.
Yep, we definitely have some time for questions.
Yes.
Enjoyed your talk. Just curious, what are the biggest challenges to team science and bringing together large groups of scientists at various scales?
It's a really good question. So a lot of the barriers have been the invisibility of the labor, the dedicated labor that it takes to do it right. So I have a slide that is not here, but I can just tell you about it. That it was a study of 10 years contrasting single PI-led projects with larger centers. And the way that it shows the publications, just a bibliometric study, for 3 years, the center's productivity of a PI lags behind 2 different kinds of, in this case, NIH grants that would be PI-led. But then after the 3rd year, it like just geometrically grows. So I think it's really interesting to see that it takes, I think the challenge is finding the conditions, creating the buy-in, and also just the pragmatic possibility of putting in that investment to get the benefit. So I think a lot of it is just people are hand to mouth in research. And sometimes they don't have the luxury, even if they do buy in and do understand the value of that invisible labor. And then I think it's also been, well, I think it's not important. The evidence says that that it's also been the tenure and promotion incentives packages work against people, so that in some cases they're taxing their own career in order to do collaboration on the side, because the way that the tenure and promotion packages are set, or like criteria are set up, you might have to justify, well, why are you on 5 papers with this many people? Why are you not first author? Why is this journal of ecology, but you're a statistician or something? And so I think those are really the big barriers. And then some of the others are just, I think the lack of understanding of how much clear, explicit communication about expectations can enable, interpersonal successes.
I have 2 questions, and I'll ask the maybe easier one first. So how do you deal with people that you invite to these teams or these systems that just don't work? I mean, do you just kind of say like, oh, sorry, we're bringing on somebody else, or is there, because it seems like that also could just really affect the function and then takes so much extra time as everyone else tries to do their work.
That's a really great question. And I feel like the best approaches are that I see, like, for example, in the collaboration planning, there's comprehensive collaboration planning in the strategy for team science success textbook. And it's basically about getting out ahead of those things, kind of almost like a course syllabus Like, you wouldn't have students in class and then be like, at the end, I'll just kind of like have an emotional talk with you about whether you did well or not. But I feel like that's how we almost set ourselves up in research a lot. So people have to kind of buy into this collaboration planning where you would say, maybe make some reporting scaffolding and then also some different levels of accountability. So for example, in SAINT, we would have an external advisory board or an external review panel, and they would review each project or PI's annual report and give their opinion about strengths and weaknesses. And so that helps alleviate any sort of interpersonal issues by having external feedback on like, hey, I get that there was a problem, but like you didn't deliver on XYZ explicit expectations. And so you'll have to take a pause and come back next year. So I think putting processes in place that so it distances it from like an interpersonal conflict is probably the best answer. And then the other part is like on the way in, kind of choosing your collaboration buddies, having some conversations about like what are your expectations. And I guess the director of our center where Jason and I met, he would always say when people asked how do you put together a team, he would always use the analogy, it's like planning a dinner party. You like pick people that you think are going to be interesting to each other and challenge each other and get the right ones sitting by each other. And so I think it's both of those, like team formation thought and then explicit handling so that you're not having to negotiate it on a one-on-one basis later. Does that answer?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. My second question was about like, what do we need to be doing with undergraduates to help them embrace this mindset better? Are there some tools that you've learned from your experience with them at App State that?
One of the things I think I glossed over because I didn't want to talk in too much detail, but one of the things I think is modeling epistemic humility within the faculty groups about how you have to model the okayness of not knowing things. And that doesn't mean like forgive yourself for only having a half-hearted effort on the rigorous science you're supposed to be learning, but when you don't know something that's out of your wheelhouse, I think it's good. Like in our ramp course, we've gotten feedback from prior versions of that the thing they learned from most is hearing professors say like, well, I didn't know anything at all about that to their colleague from a different discipline. Because I think that what we've heard from the students who are burdened by this is that their first thought is that they're supposed to just learn everything and then they feel overwhelmed. And so if we can kind of set the expectation like, one, you don't have to know everything, but two, we can put in practice like habits of stating when we don't know and model that for them ourselves so that they don't feel like vulnerable about saying like, I was telling Chris, Jason, and Jared last night that we had one of these interdisciplinary meetings and there was this like, you know, super successful full professor in cellular biology. And she was like, can we stop? What is soil? I don't know what soil is. And we were like, what? But it was such a smart question and it sparked really good conversation. I think it set the tone that like, hey, any questions are on the table. So, but also I will say education in convergence is a really, really big topic in the science of team science community right now. And there's like pedagogical developments that's outside my wheelhouse. I'm again, not like kind of practitioner that doesn't promise to, you know, pretend to be an educational researcher. But I think it's a very hot topic is like, how do we practically do this without overwhelming or creating generalists that don't have like a marketable single skill they can fall on? Yeah.
I guess I just want to follow up and ask, like, we don't really take courses, outside of our disciplines. So, are people trying to like implement this convergent science idea in like undergraduate courses, like maybe through like group work or teamwork? Like, what would that look like?
I feel like because I know there are people doing like real education research across the the systems, I want to just preface by saying this is what I've seen, but I do know of lots of different sort of, well, I think you have one here that's sort of like a sampling platter of different disciplines, that are freshman year seminars or, topically based. I've seen a few sort of design courses that are designed around that. And one thing that I fall on here for when we're trying to design a class like that is the NSF definition of convergence is that it's oriented around a problem. And so if you can get people together around like a shared problem rather than like a method or like what the discipline is, then they can get connected to how like a chemist is coming at it different than like, the social scientist or the economist. So I think it's probably like for now, what I'm seeing out there is experiment. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to reading a review paper so I can copy off somebody else's great ideas. Yes.
Yeah, so, when you were showing the thing about how phosphorus spans these like scales and boundaries and things, and I was thinking like, well, and this is one of the reasons I invited you. Here at UK, we have people working on phosphorus across those boundaries, and we have kind of a unique site in that we have very high geogenic concentrations of phosphorus in the soil and things like that. But what you see is maybe like small teams of people working together, or people just working completely independently, not really putting it all together. And it seems like in your case, you have this giant pot of money, and that's a huge motivator for people to work together.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, like, were people sort of already kind of coming together with that center before that big pot of money was there, or was that really like what got people working together? Like, can you get people to work together without like $50 million?
I'll say this center, one of the reasons I was so excited to be invited to it is because they were actually, I was working with them for 2 years before for getting it, and then the broader they were working together for 4 years leading up to it. Now, they were working to win the money. So I think in that case, they didn't know yet, but it was still clearly like, this is our marathon finish line. And then actual starting line of the next like double marathon, but I think it's tough to do that. Like, it's tough to align the incentives if it's not for a specific shared vision like that.
Yeah.
Then I think institutional structures or something else.
Well, it's even like, if you know that opportunity is going to happen,
Yeah.
but actually there's always going to be, there will be an opportunity at some point, but if you don't prepare for it, you're just going to be way too late, because usually you have very little time to prepare these grants and things like that. And I'm just wondering, like, did people already have the mindset that there was going to be the opportunity, or was it already kind of known that this was coming down the pike?
There was a very generous seed funding program from NC State and RTI International called GRIP. And it was significant, like $300,000 or something. And actually my husband was part of that team. And then he was like, you should take my wife, not me, because I don't want to do this. And so that's how I got introduced. They did, he was like a water technologist on that team. So they worked on it, and they were working on, it was like emerging technologies. I forget what GRIP stands for, but it was not only phosphorus.
Mm-hmm.
And through that process, the idea was that was going to spark some kind of an engine. They knew that they wanted to get an NRC, like I think either an ERC or an STC. So the idea that they were going to crystallize the vision through that seed grant, which is got people kind of to the table. And then by then there was like enough critical mass, and then a really just sharp vision that it was like, we're going to plant our flag in one element and then make a case for it. And then enough people kind of nucleated around it. Yeah, but it was money the whole time. Like,
Well, and what's the importance of like a charismatic, like, leader pulling to get people together?
I think that's it. Like, I can't say enough about our director. He has so much energy, he's like in positivity, and he's just wildly curious. And so I think people are like, that guy's going places. I'll go with him. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we're about out of time, so thank you very much. Oh, wait, is there any questions on Zoom? 'Cause
Oh,
I think there's like 10.
There is a chat, yes. What, whose chat is
I
it?
took up all that time.
Oh, Ray Smith says, are you doing phosphorus runoff research coming from the regional watershed you are in? We are planning to. So I'm waiting to see what our proposals come in this round, because like I was saying, every year they have to do a new subtask for our big map. And so, yes, I hope so. What we're figuring out now is what measurement techniques, and if they're gonna just do orthophosphate or what kind of analysis they're gonna do across everything. But thank you, Ray, for the question.